Hi all, Trace here, the air quotation marks, humorous tutor, and today we're going to be going through the basics of the blood flow through the heart. So, to start off, let's identify exactly where the heart is in the body. What we're looking at is a diagram of the major organs in the ventral cavity. We can further divide the ventral cavity into a superior and an inferior section. These sections are separated by the diaphragm, and the diaphragm is a sheet of skeletal muscle. So, above the diaphragm, in that more superior ventral cavity, this is called the thoracic cavity. Below the diaphragm, more inferiorly, we find the abdominopelvic cavity. Now we're talking about the heart, so let's have a look at the thoracic cavity. We can see that thoracic cavity is largely filled by two lungs, a right and a left, and sandwiched between them is our heart. Now it's time to look at the heart itself. As you can see, it's not shaped like the love hearts that I've been drawing throughout this video. What we see here is an anterior view of the heart, and the heart is composed of 4 chambers, 2 atria and 2 ventricles. To help us remember which ones are the atria and which ones are the ventricles, I've just drawn a kite shape and split it into 4 to represent the 4 chambers of the heart. So, up top, I've just drawn an A following the boundary of that kite shape, and the top ones are the 2 atria. You can see that they're also the smaller of the 2 types of chambers. So following the kite shape, we've got A for atria up top. And below that, once again following the boundary, we can draw a V for ventricles, and ventricles being the more inferior chambers and also much larger. Generally speaking, in coloured diagrams, blue will represent vessels that are carrying deoxygenated blood, and red will be representing vessels that carry oxygenated blood. Please remember that these colours in diagrams represent the type of blood they carry, and do not at all represent whether it's an artery or a vein. Arteries and veins are types of vessels that help to transport the blood around the body. So, arteries are defined as vessels which take blood away from the heart. I find this easy to remember because artery starts with A and so does away. So arteries, taking blood away from the heart. Conversely, we have veins, and veins are taking blood the opposite direction, towards the heart. I remember this by veins has in within the word, and so veins are going to deliver blood back into the heart. Now I've drawn this little schematic over on the left here, and we can see the 2 incredibly anatomically not very correct lungs, but they kind of look like lungs, so we're going to go with it, and also the kite-shaped heart representing the 4 chambers and the rest of the body. So the whole point is to deliver oxygen to the rest of the body where the tissues are, and these tissues are going to use it and produce carbon dioxide. So from the rest of the body, we're going to deliver that deoxygenated blood first to the right atrium, which then passes it on to the right ventricle. The right ventricle is then going to pump that deoxygenated blood to the right and the left lungs. This blood then offloads its carbon dioxide and picks up fresh oxygen. This fresh oxygenated blood is then delivered to the left atrium and then to the left ventricle, the left side being associated with the systemic circulation and is much stronger. This left ventricle then pumps this fresh oxygenated blood to the rest of the body, where we can then use that oxygen and the cycle starts again. Looking at the anatomy of the actual heart and not my shoddy kite diagram, we've got the right atrium and the right ventricle sitting underneath the right atrium. And then a little bit more posteriorly and hidden behind are the left atrium and the left ventricles. The layer of muscle that divides the 2 ventricles is called the interventricular septum. So what I'm indicating here isn't quite the muscle itself, but we'll see it in a future diagram. Remembering that the right side of the heart is associated with the lungs and therefore the pulmonary circulation, the right ventricle will deliver that deoxygenated blood via the pulmonary trunk. The pulmonary trunk then bifurcates and becomes the right and left pulmonary arteries. Remember, it's taking blood away from the heart. The left side of the heart, then needing to be much stronger and delivering blood to the systemic circulation to our tissues, is then going to deliver that freshly oxygenated blood from the left ventricle and up through the aorta. We can see at the region of the aortic arch there are 3 branches coming off of it. I remember it as the ABCs. We've got the A for aorta, B for the brachiocephalic trunk, being the first branch coming off the aortic arch, brachio meaning arm and cephalic meaning head. So this branch is going to deliver that blood up through the upper limb and also to the head region. Next up we've got A and then B, now C's. So C is for our common carotid artery, specifically the left one. And then furthermore, we have our ABCs. So the S, being last, is our left subclavian artery. And that's how I remember the 3 branches coming off the aortic arch. A few more major vessels to label here. In blue, on the right-hand side of the heart, delivering deoxygenated blood to the right atrium, we have the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava, the 2 largest veins in the body. So we've got deoxygenated blood in the right atrium, we have something coming out of the right ventricle, the pulmonary trunk, we've got the left ventricle pumping blood out of the aorta. We just need something to deliver that fresh oxygenated blood to the left atrium, and this is going to be done via the pulmonary veins. 2 right and 2 left, delivering blood back into the heart at the left atrium. Just a little bit more anatomy to go through, and to look at the valves that sit within the heart, we're going to have to look at a cross-section. So here we've got a cross-section cut along the frontal section of the heart. So we're still looking at it from the front, and we've got an anterior view. So what we're looking at here are the 4 valves. There are 4 valves in the heart to control blood flow, because we don't want blood going back into a chamber where it shouldn't be. We want that flow to be unidirectional. We have 2 atrioventricular valves. Atrio and ventricular gives us a hint as to where these valves will be found. They're going to be found in between the atrium and the ventricle. The other 2 valves are called our semilunar valves. Our semilunar valves have 3 cusps, and they're named after their shape, half moon. These are our aortic and pulmonary valves. So, individually, let's have a talk about the valves themselves. Our first AV valve is the tricuspid, meaning it has 3 cusps. I remember this also because tri has ri, so I kind of think tricuspid, and we've got the tricuspid valve on the right side of the heart, sitting between the right atrium and the right ventricle. The next one is the bicuspid valve, also called the mitral. As suggested by the name, it's got 2 cusps. So I've got the tricuspid between the right atrium and the right ventricle, and the mitral between the left atrium and the left ventricle. Now to the semilunar valves. Both semilunar valves have 3 cusps, and I think that they're really easy to remember because they're named after exactly where they are found. We've got the aortic valve at the base of the aorta, and the pulmonary valve at the base of the pulmonary trunk. Alright, now it's time to put everything that we've just talked about together, and so we can talk about and understand the basics of the cardiac cycle. And to do this, so we can see the anatomy and the direction of the blood flow, we're going to use that anterior cross-section of the heart. Just a few more terms to identify. Systole and diastole. Systole is just another word of saying contraction, and diastole describes the relaxation phase of the cardiac cycle. So, on the left, we've indicated tissues, and on the right, we've indicated the lungs. Let's do it. Starting again at the tissues are going to deliver that blue deoxygenated blood to the right atrium via the superior and inferior vena cava. During diastole, whilst the heart is relaxing, this blood will largely passively flow to the right ventricle. During systole then, when the heart contracts, the right ventricle then pumps this deoxygenated blood up the pulmonary trunk to the pulmonary arteries to deliver it to the lungs. At the side of the lungs is where gas exchange occurs, where we trade in carbon dioxide and we take on oxygen. This oxygenated blood is then delivered to the left atrium via the pulmonary veins, remember, back into the heart. I'm just going to go over that with black because red was not the best colour. So then during diastole, this blood that has entered the left atrium will pass through the mitral valve or the bicuspid valve and enter the left ventricle. Once diastole is over and systole begins, the heart then pumps again to push this oxygenated blood out through the aortic valve and into the aorta to be delivered to the body. Generally speaking, above the level of the heart, this blood will be delivered via those three main branches that we previously talked about at the aortic arch, our ABCs. Below the level of the heart, that blood then travels via the descending or abdominal aorta, depending on the level, to then be distributed through the tissues. Once this oxygenated blood reaches its target tissues, depending on the level of need of the cell or its environment, oxygen will be offloaded from the red blood cell and often carbon dioxide will be taken on. And that's largely it. It's important to remember that the cardiac cycle is composed of a systole and a diastole, a contraction and a relaxation phase. And so perhaps it's more accurate to say that what we've really done here is to trace the blood flow from the tissues to the heart, to the lungs, to the heart, and then back to the tissues again, over the course of more than one cardiac cycle. And that's it. Thank you for keeping up with me and my messy scribbles, of course. I hope you understand the anatomy of the heart and also understand the basics of the cardiac cycle, the systole, diastole, and also can trace the flow of blood through the heart. Thank you again. Let's build on this understanding in a future video. Until next time.